And we'll get started in a couple minutes, or we'll get started right at noon, and then folks can trickle in.
Sounds good for a half an hour thing, right?
Yeah, yeah. And
Otherwise, I
it's
just have to
recorded,
talk
so
faster.
right. Well, we don't want that. We want, the time to be used
Yeah,
in a meaningful way, and the
Sure,
recording will be available for anyone who misses the
right.
start of it. So,
sure.
hi, Karen, welcome.
Hi, Karen.
Hello, getting set up.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Hey, Rachel.
Hey, we can go ahead and get started. Thank you all for being here. And I am Jess Perush. I'm with the Office for Teaching and Learning. I'm an educational and development specialist. So today I will be introducing Nicole to us in a little bit, and we'll be talking about cultural diversity. Just a little bit of the logistics. The presentation will be about 15 minutes, and then we'll use the rest of the time for any Q&A. We are recording, and I will stop the recording for the Q&A session. So if you have any questions, please hold on to them, put them in the chat, and we can loop back to those at the end. Right. Okay. So the AAC&U has defined global learning as analysis and engagement with interdependent global systems and their implications for our lives and planet. Global learning enhances students' understanding of their own identities and communities, ethics, and perspective taking in our interconnected world. And to help institutions evaluate students in this context, the AAC&U, which is the American Association of Colleges and Universities, has created the Global Learning Value Rubric, which is where the information we'll introducing comes from. And I will also share that in the chat as a PDF. And this rubric serves as a tool to assess student learning in global contexts across an entire program, not just within a single experience or course. All right. So we ask, what is cultural diversity? This is one of 6 of the criteria in the AAC&U's value rubric. And according to the AAC&U, cultural diversity involves recognizing both the origins and limitations of our own cultural heritage. It's also about cultivating curiosity. We want students to develop a genuine interest and also learn about other cultures in a respectful way. This enriches their understanding, prepares them to navigate cultural differences, and collaborate across cultural boundaries. And then within this rubric, students are asked to analyze how cultures are positioned within broader power structures and understand the roles that race, ethnicity, gender, nationhood, and class and religion have in these systems. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Nicole. Nicole is an associate professor in classical and modern languages, literatures, and cultures, and is the director of global studies.
Thank you, Jess. And
Yes.
welcome to everyone who's here. Thank you so much for spending this half an hour with us today. So as Jess said, I teach German and global studies, and one of the classes I teach there is a class called Intercultural Competence for a Global World. So that's where global learning comes in most naturally. But I have 2 things that I want to start off with. And one is that global learning doesn't just happen in classes that have the GL Gen Ed designation. It can happen anywhere. And the other thing is that also in our GL classes, it doesn't just happen automatically. We actually have to do a couple of things to get to real global learning. And I think those rubrics are really helpful for reminding us what it actually is that we want our students to get out of it. Also, when we talk about cultural diversity, which is the topic of today, I want to make sure that we know that cultural diversity happens or is everywhere, is in our classrooms already. And so I will start with a little bit of a culture definition. So thinking about what culture actually is, because one thing I want my students to take from all my classes is that culture is not just national culture. Then after I share a little bit about culture, I'll share a couple of intercultural competence models to tell you a little bit about what intercultural trainers want students to do. And then I'll look at kind of language from my own classes, learning outcomes and assignments, how that actually appears. And then we can talk a little bit about how you can put this into your own classes. So the culture definition I have here on the slide comes from the European Council. There are lots of others. What I like about this one is how broad it is and how also relevant to all of us. So this definition says that culture is a set of distinctive spiritual, material, intellectual, and emotional features of society or a social group. And it specifically says it's not just about art and literature, it's about lifestyles, ways of living together, value systems, traditions, and beliefs. And all of those come into our classes, right? So everyone is cultural, everyone has cultural filters, and we all come with these different ways of living together into the classes that we have together. Now, every cultural group then has cultural resources, and these cultural resources are available to everyone within that group, but each individual member uses only a subset of these cultural resources that are available to them. And that's why there's so much variability within each cultural group, and also blurred group boundaries. So students may, well, now everyone is part of many different cultural groups. And so that's where also blurred group boundaries can come from, and where we can find similarities and differences across these many different groups. I'm going to get to the next slide. So if we say that, we can also say that any social group can have a culture, and that all cultures are dynamic and constantly change over time as a result of internal and external factors. We all belong to multiple groups and their cultures and participate in these different constellations of cultures. So these cultural affiliations are then fluid and dynamic and have a strong subjective dimension. And what that means is that we as individuals, we inhabit these cultures, but we also identify with some of them. We play the culture card sometimes and sometimes not. We may draw more on one cultural group we belong to than on others at certain times in specific contexts. And it's what makes culture so interesting, but it also has a little bit of a vague idea of it, right? That we can't really pin culture down and say, this is what culture is, this is what culture tells us to do, this is how you behave within a culture. These clear-cut rules don't really exist. And the uncertainty that results from that is part of intercultural competence, but it's also something that makes working with this sometimes a little difficult because it's hard to grasp sometimes. Let's move to the next slide. So kind of as a summary of this culture definition, cultures are heterogeneous, fluid, and overlapping. It's not the same as national culture. There are small and big cultures, which means that all of our social groups are social life worlds that give us meaning. They give us certain vocabulary, they give us specific expectations, cultural standards, and so on. And people are not determined by culture. They're not doing something because they are United Statesian or of any other national origin. They're not doing anything because they are part of a racial group or a religious group and so on, but they are working from a specific context. So all cultures are already diverse, and we, as faculty, and also our students, need to avoid the trap of essentialism. And what that means is that we assume that something has an inherent characteristic because of a cultural group. So saying, all right, of course, she is super punctual, she is German, so this would be about me. But I'm German and I happen to be pretty punctual. There's a cultural standard about that, sure, but I could get out of that restraint, or rather, it's not a restraint, right? So essentializing people based on big groups will make it too neat. It assumes that cultures are these tight little boxes, and we sit in these boxes and just do what you can do in these boxes, and that's really not what's happening. So then we need intercultural competence to tell us how we go about now using this really broad notion, potentially in our classrooms. And I have two models here that are really, well, they are relevant in intercultural communication scholarship, but also I think they're pretty easy to use when we think about our classrooms. So this one, I have a lot of problems with this one, but it's still useful. And I'll tell you about the problems in a second. So Milton Bennett wrote this in the 80s, so it's old, but still talked about quite a bit. So this is the 6 stages he comes up with that people go through moving towards intercultural competence. So he was a trainer, so he picked up on some level here and try to move the students or his trainees on the scale to the right direction. So he called the first 3 stages here ethnocentric stages, where we look at everything from our own cultural place. So we have our cultural filters, and our perspective is very much influenced by where we are. And the 3 later stages he called ethno-relative stages, which meant that we're looking at it, we're bouncing back and forth a little more, where we can step outside. Whether that's possible or not is a different question, but we don't have to be at the center of our own culture and look from there, but rather we can see these different kind of cultural things happening at the same time. Where we often get stuck here is the minimization stage, which sounds quite good at first, but we would want to get beyond that. So in the minimization stage, it's also something that we can call universalism stage is, oh, we're all humans. We're all alike. We're more alike than not, right? So we should just get along with each other. We don't really need to focus on differences. But differences do exist, right? And we're talking about cultural diversity today. So the appreciation for differences and also being able to stand difference and say, okay, I don't agree with that, but it's valid, is something where we have to get out of that minimization stage to actually see that. And that comes in what Bennett calls the acceptance stage, and then adaptation and integration. All right, let's go to another model, which is Darla Deodorff's model. It's a lot newer. It's from 2006. And she questioned some scholars and advisors who work in global education about what intercultural competence actually is. And then she got agreement on some aspects and put together her model based on that. So she phrases a desired external outcome, which is behaving and communicating effectively and appropriately to achieve one's goal to some degree. So her field is communication. Makes sense now that she has the behaving and communicating effectively and appropriately in her definition of intercultural competence. What I find a lot more interesting here is kind of where the basis for this outcome is. So kind of the bottom of the pyramid. And she has certain attitudes, skills, and knowledge that are necessary for us to get to those outcomes. And some of these attitudes are curiosity. And maybe you picked up on that already. That's part of the value rubric for cultural diversity. So curiosity. And connected to that, tolerating ambiguity and uncertainty, which is really hard to do. So letting actual things stand that we don't understand or that are potentially critical to what we believe is not easy, but that's an attitude that will allow us to move beyond ourselves and become more flexible and get to a more ethno-relative view in turn. All right, let's move from these models and look at the value rubric again. So cultural diversity had recognizing the origins and limitation of one's own cultural heritage. So that's from Diodorov's part, knowledge about our own cultures, our own cultural positionings. Only if we understand where we are coming from, that we have cultural filters, is it also possible to actually see the differences out there. Then the curiosity part, I already talked about this, and only with kind of those attitudes and skills are we able to navigate differences and collaborate across. Right, let's move to the next one. So what does that mean in the classroom? In the classroom, we can include specific knowledge about different cultures, about power structures, about inequalities. We can also try to hone attitudes that encourage curiosity and openness. And skills, in very particular, are listening and perspective taking that would come into play here. But how do we do this? One, reflection is key. So to understand ourselves and our own cultural positionings, we have to have space to self-reflect and do that in a rather safe space. So probably not out in an open discussion, but rather in something like a journal where we can go deep. There has to be a space for listening, not just for speaking. And actually teaching how to listen actively is not something we often focus on. So when people are speaking, that others might be encouraged to report back what they heard, to see whether they have actually been listening or just hearing or not, right? Or being on whatever social media is actually relevant for the generation that I don't totally understand anymore. And then there are some effective outcomes which don't neatly fit into Bloom's taxonomy, but which I find really, really important. And I'll show some of these effective outcomes that I have phrased for my intercultural class on the next slide. So I formulated it this way. At the end of this course, you will be able to interact with other students in emerging interculturally competent ways, which means to be able to listen to your classmates and their opinions, to consider and relate to others' worldviews and perspectives, to stand uncertainty, and to respect and value difference. Now, these sound very much like global learning standards. What they are not is part of Bloom's taxonomy, something that you can measure very easily. So this might not work in a way that you can say, okay, this student did this for sure because they did X. That might not come about that way, but we can still encourage it without measuring it. Or if you have different grading systems, which come join our teaching circle on more learning than grading, then it is easy to actually put this in, because the more students listen, the more they move towards that goal of being able to listen actively. The more they are relating to others, the more they move a little bit on that scale. And that's why I'm saying emerging interculturally competent ways, because I also want to make sure that students don't think they get out of my class and they are masters of intercultural competence. They are done. They never have to do anything anymore, right? So that just doesn't happen. Intercultural competence is something we have to work on all the time. I find myself sometimes saying, oh my God, this is so exhausting to be interculturally competent here again. So sometimes we also go kind of the safe route and say, okay, not today. And it's okay. We're just kind of steadily moving towards it. So let's go to the next. So I put our Gen Ed, so Wayne State, Gen Ed, the Global Learning Inquiry outcomes here, and just kind of related them to the value rubric. I'm not going to go through this, but it aligns pretty well. And so does actually the DEI outcomes, because of course DEI has diversity in its name because cultural diversity happens right here in the US. It's not just a global phenomenon. But I just wanted to have that here and we can move on. So I already talked a little bit about how to do this, but I wanted to end this short introduction here with some assignments. Discussion is key, I think. We cannot hear other people's perspective if we don't discuss. Right? If we only get talked at, we might listen, probably not for very long, but actually listening to somebody, being curious about their opinions, relating, taking others' perspectives and running with it, or actually disagreeing and working through it can only really happen in interpersonal communication in discussions. But that's not all. We do need that space for being reflective, and I think journals are best for that. You can also compare them, and you can relate your own cultural being to what you read in class. It's really important to have that space where you can sit with your thoughts and work through them, which is not going to happen spontaneously in class usually. And then there's analysis. So I think fourth or fifth point of the rubric talks about analyzing, right? And so analysis is something that goes a little deeper. So it can be an essay, it can be a shorter writing assignment, but it can also be projects like videos or podcasts where students have to research different perspectives and then apply the skills they learn to actually working through it and analyzing a cultural product or a source. And again, this can happen in any class. It doesn't have to mean you have to have a global connection in the class, because we have diverse perspectives right here, and we have diverse perspectives in every discipline. So I think that's a definite step. So when we're thinking about assignments here, we also think about what comes before that. So the readings we present, the videos, the TED Talks, whatever we bring into the class, if we can have diverse voices in those, then students can grapple with different perspectives afterwards and make those comparisons and apply these skills that we've just talked about. Great, I think that was my last slide. Is that right? Yes. So there are some more resources
Yes.
here. Yeah, Jess, do you want to take back over?
Oh, yeah. No, I was just going to say we have these resources and I will share these in an email after the Lunch and Learn along with the value rubric. And we have our OTL contact information here. So if anyone wants to reach out for a consultation, please feel encouraged to do so. And I would just say, thank you so much, Nicole, for being here today. And thank you, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and stop recording, and we have a few minutes for Q&A. Let's see.